Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fish Tales. I'm your host, Lee Trout, and today I'm excited to talk to John Petitte. He's the CEO of Amplify Labs. John, please introduce yourself.
It's great to be here, Lee. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, I can produce sufficiently interesting conversation here today. You know, like you mentioned, I'm John Petitte, co-founder of Amplify Labs. My background is not in technology, but that's what I've ended up in. Where, you know, Amplify Labs, all we do is technology. We build things for other companies. So it's been kind of an interesting journey. Maybe we'll get into that at some point. But, you know, I started off in chemical engineering, biochemistry, that kind of world, and then shifted over to software. So it's been quite a journey.
I want to hear about that. So if you're not going to start there, I feel like I interrupted you. If you're not going to start there, I definitely want to hear about that.
Yeah, no problem. So when I went into college, I had always been really interested in biology, things like that as a kid, but I was always building things as well. And I was building a lot of things on my own, mostly physical things prior to college. And then I got into college and I wasn't spending my time building things like I had been. And I felt that something was kind of missing as I was doing my degrees and things like that. And then I'd spent 5 years in school, and around the fourth-ish year, I found what you could consider like the entrepreneurial community. I don't remember if it was a department, if it was just how it was structured at NC State, but I found that, and then that's when I realized, you know, entrepreneurship, creating things, that's what really drives me and is interesting. And I wasn't cut out to, you know, live in a corporate environment, competing against people in a corporate environment. I just didn't really care about it. It's not what I was designed to do. It's not what I could do better than other folks. So after finding that, and that became clear, then I realized, hey, you know, you can be an entrepreneur anywhere, but my degrees in chemical engineering and biochemistry don't allow me to build as many things or as interesting things, even as quickly, you know, in an iterative process is what I would like to do. And software allows you to do that. So then I saw software as like an interesting tool to have in my toolbox of things to build with. And I started teaching myself software at that time. There's still a big gap of life between there and today, you know, which we can go into if you want, or, you know, it can come out as we continue to talk. It's up to you. I could talk forever about it. Right.
Well, no, I mean, it's up to you too. I want to talk about something right now that you just brought up. Like, let's stay here for just a second. Not competing in a corporate environment. I literally just posted something on Hacker News. I read way too much Hacker News and I get on there and comment too much. But somebody made a comment about how we spend 40 hours a week competing in our society and our work or whatever. And my interpretation of that, and the thing that I took away from that, is how I projected, so maybe not that I took away, it's that I projected my personal experience on that. And it's the biggest frustration I have felt in several jobs, is that there is so much waste where teams aren't functioning. There's a dysfunction in these teams because teams are competing against themselves. There's this friction, and some of that's natural. That happens. It's natural. I'm type A. I go there. It just is. It's some of it's natural, but it's amazing how much we put on ourselves. Some people, I will say I put that on myself, that like you kind of look around and you get distracted, like got to climb the ladder, this more society that we have. You got to climb the ladder. And I just thought it was interesting the way you talked about that. You use the word competing, because I think that's a lot of corporate environments. Yeah.
And I mean, competition is important. It's good. Right. But it can be destructive simultaneously. I forget do you remember the book or who talked about different levels of leadership? I can't remember where that was, but like there are 5, and the top being demonstrated very rarely, but, you know, Nelson Mandela being one of the folks who demonstrated level 5 leadership, where instead of competitive progress, it was collaborative progress. Right. So competitive progress is level 4, and that's great, but it's much easier for that to devolve into something destructive, right? And yeah, I mean, you've seen it in corporate environments. It's very natural for that to happen in corporate environments, because in order to rip a team out of negative competitive tendencies, you have to have somebody at the top who's like a captain and can say, hey, look, we need to stop doing this, and then demonstrate it themselves. Whatever. They have to be Nelson Mandela, which is incredibly difficult, right? There aren't that many Nelson Mandelas out there.
So I Googled this as you're talking. Yeah, I see this level 5 leadership. There's an article. I took like the first Google hit around this, and it talks about different types of leadership. And it says, this article says we're going to break down the factors of what leads to level 5 leadership. And one of the things that I saw it mentioned, and now I just lost it. It was Jim Collins wrote a book,
Yes.
Good to Great.
Okay, it was Good to Great. Excellent.
And it does talk about, I do see this too, about Nelson Mandela. And this thing, it says, one of the pull quotes that I just saw in the Google results was that a leader is a dealer in hope.
Yeah.
I think that's right?
Yeah.
That is that. And it's kind of what you were talking about. The leader has that vision, and it's about rallying around that and being optimistic.
Yeah. And man, it's so hard to find that in the corporate world, right? Like probably 80+% of corporate environments are not like that, just because individuals who can make that happen are so rare and few and far between. And for folks like myself and probably like you, what drives us is not, how do I describe it? Is not a pointless competition. What drives us is to do something cool, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to get to the end and say like, oh, like, man, it was an amazing journey. Look what we got out of the end of that. There was a reason I did this. We created value somewhere, rather than just be like, I'm the king of the tire fire or whatever. I don't want to be a king of a tire fire. I want to look back on my life and be like, yeah, that was a wild ride. I'm glad I did it.
I love that you use the word value. My friends give me a hard time because I talk to them. I talk about how I relate myself. I was like, I am not a good worker bee. Like, I don't mind being in a corporate environment, but I'm not a good worker bee. And my friend's like, what's that mean? What does it mean to be a worker bee? And I was like, well, I just mean this idea that you're happy finding some set of instructions and executing on those in some level, and that you are more constrained in the execution that you need to perform. And there's a safety in that.
Yes.
There's a comfort in that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is not. But for me, I start kind of like bumping up against those boundaries. And I'm like, no, but wait, but why? But why do we have to do it this way? And so as we've joked and talked about this, one of the things I've always joked about with my friends, and I give them a hard time, is like, I've way overworked in my life, workaholic. Now I'm taking this time and I'm doing this podcast and all this, more creative stuff. And it's been this joke about how much value have you delivered today, Lee? And I've like made jokes about like, hey, everyone, today I delivered 0 shareholder value. But the joke being that that's a good thing, since I've like, catching my breath. So,
yeah, I mean, there are two interesting things that you mentioned. So one is value, and the term is, you could probably say it's way overused in the world of entrepreneurship. But I mean, honestly, that's what everything comes down to, right? People can find value in different things in different ways, but you have to produce that. And for folks who do this for a living, that's what drives us, right? Like producing value is the reason why we sacrifice things. It's interesting, the worker bee concept. So, because when I look at myself and how I work and where my brain is at while I'm doing different things, I find that for me, there is a necessary balance between a cathartic amount of repetitive work, like, the type of high people get from running or doing a repetitive task that allows your brain to flow off into another direction, while you're being productive and doing something. But then also there's another balance of work that is not repetitive and it's creative and it's making something out of nothing. And it's very challenging to do that work. You can't do that work for 8 hours a day because you can exhaust muscles, right? But it's weird to discover you can exhaust your brain, right? Which is interesting in and of itself. I don't know how exactly that works. I don't know the biochemical meaning of all of that, but you can do it, right? Like, you can't be productively creative for 8 hours a day. If there is somebody out there who's like that, they're very rare, like more rare than successful entrepreneurs, right? But
I think if those people are out there, they have something biologically
Yes.
different. It's kind of like where people talk about, and you may fall into this camp, people that talk about the high end of productivity, I guess, is broadly this high end of productivity. And it's these people that have a biological disposition to only needing 6 hours of sleep. And there's some science that's kind of debunked that. And it's been like, well, no, everybody still needs X amount of sleep, but that's a fact. There are people out there that function just fine on minimal sleep, and they do get more done in a day because they have more hours in a day.
So I would love to be one of those people. I have dreamed about being somebody who can function on very low amounts of sleep. My wife is way more productive on less sleep than I am, which is great because she has generously taken the responsibility of caring for our 6-month-old in the middle of the night. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not one of them. It's something, it drives me nuts, but I've accepted it at this point, right? You work with the tools you have.
I'm a night owl, but I still need at least 8 hours of sleep. I really, honestly, I would say 3 to 4 days a week, I could totally go for 9 or 10 hours of sleep. It's bad, but I make myself function. I shoot for the 7 to 8 hours and try to do, if I have to shorten my sleep, I try to, there's those alarm clocks online. You can look up, if I go to sleep now, what time should I wake up at the end of a sleep cycle? And so I try to find one of those time periods, or I stay up a little later to go to sleep when I'll line up with one of those cycles.
Do you sleep all the way through the night?
Oh, that's tough. It's rare that I sleep. If I sleep all the way through the night, and I mean sleep like the dead, I have weird problems from that. My ear will hurt. I will literally sleep and not roll over. And so I will get weird pain in my shoulder where I pinch a nerve or something. And there's actually a thing called Saturday night palsy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but you can cause, it's basically it's the colloquialism for you got drunk, you slept in a weird way, you pinched a nerve. But yeah, this whole thing.
That's a great
Saturday
name.
Night palsy.
That's a great name.
But there are times I will sleep like that. It's generally if I've taken too much magnesium. I'm a big fan of magnesium when I've been hiking, and I will just go ahead and take it to avoid bad leg cramps, because I get horrible leg cramps, especially at night. And so I will take a little magnesium. If I take too much magnesium, I am out.
Interesting. So I maybe have slept through the night twice since high school.
Wow.
I wake up after every sleep cycle. So every REM cycle, I will wake up. And I'm a very light sleeper. So if I hear things, I'll wake up. I sleep so lightly that after every REM cycle, I will get up and have to use the bathroom, because my body's like, hey, look, you kind of have to go. You should go. And I can't fall asleep unless I go again, because my body's like, hey, look, we're awake. Let's do this. Right. But my wife, on the other hand, all the way through the night, pretty much no matter what, she will go. Now we'll see if it changes after, having a 6-month-old or, whatever month-old getting you up every couple hours for forever. But yeah, for me, it's been kind of interesting, because the funny thing is, I remember as a kid, when I was young, I would hate to fall asleep, right? Because I knew that as soon as I closed my eyes, I'd open them again and it'd be time for school. And I hated school. And now it's kind of the opposite, where I'm like, oh man, just let me close my eyes and not open them again until morning. But I know that's not going to happen.
Okay, there's something there I want to relate to with you on that. I had some kind of weird, I don't know if it's related to me being depressed about school and hating it, because the same sort of thing, especially when I was a teenager. And I had this thing through high school, and I loved college. So it wasn't like a depression around college or a hate of college. And I loved my first few jobs out of school immensely and was always up and ready to go. But there was this weird thing where I felt like if I was going to sleep, I was admitting defeat for the day. So there was a little bit of FOMO.
Interesting.
Because roll back the clock. All my friends were on IRC. This is 2 decades ago. I'm getting so old. But all my friends are on IRC. There are some on the West Coast. And so, midnight for me on the East Coast, they're just getting started, 9 p.m., and I play video games with them. And so it was a little bit of FOMO with friends, drove me to stay up later, but then a little bit of this thing of there's just one more thing I could squeeze into the day, and I don't want to do it tomorrow. And there's a whole thing out there. I obviously am not a doctor. I'm not a research person, nothing, but I read this thing years ago and I need to try to find it. I'll try to put it in the show notes if I can find it. But it was around this correlation of procrastination and night owls and feeling energized. And it was related to like realizing you let the whole day go and you still want to do something. And then, but you're kind of like faking yourself out thinking I'm productive at night, but it's really you're productive at night because you're operating on the stress hormones.
Oh, interesting.
Of procrastinating all
So
day.
I will feel at night sometimes where, so I've got things to do, right? Like I've got a leaky faucet I got to fix. I got X, Y, or Z, right? There's always a list of things to do. And at night I will feel, okay, I've got, an hour here. Can I try and squeeze something in? And as I've gotten older, at this point, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I could, but it's probably going to take 2 hours. And that would take me to midnight, which would be stupid because I got to get up early for meetings tomorrow. And so, it's kind of frustrating because I have these gaps of time, especially in the evening. And like, man, it would feel so good to knock something off the list and get it done and push things forward. But then I have to I've gotten old enough where I have to restrain myself and say, all right, look, it's going to be worse actually if you do this, right? Save the fuel in your tank. And another interesting thing you mentioned, you said you hated school. So I hated school, and I mean hated school all the way up through my, I think, 4th year of college, something like that. And it's not like I did poorly in school. I just hated it. I didn't know what it meant to learn. And then when I was studying abroad in Japan, I had one class with a teacher, and her class was the one where I don't know what it was, where things clicked. But it was kind of weird where I just went into the class. I liked the teacher. It was an anthropology class, and I found the material interesting. But suddenly I had this realization of just learn the stuff that's cool, right? Like there's something cool about everything. Every class has something cool in it. Just learn the stuff that's cool, right? Don't focus on what's being asked of you to learn or anything like that. Just look for things or reasons that things are cool even. Don't worry about the tests. Like I didn't study for the tests or anything like that really. I just approached everything from a standpoint of this looks cool. Let me see how interesting that is. And let me see how interesting this is. And if it wasn't that interesting, I didn't really worry about it. And it was crazy because I ended up getting the highest grade in the class. And all I had to do was just look for things that I thought were cool and focus on those and read them and learn them and think about them. And that was a real epiphany where I went from hating school to understanding the purpose of school. It wasn't grades. It wasn't anything like that. And I still remember things from that class and how they relate to, the rest of the world and society. And like just one example that I remember. So the Shakers. Have you ever heard of the Shakers?
Like Shaker furniture?
They made furniture, yes. But, they were kind of like, you can consider maybe like the Amish, something like that. It was religious based. It was kind of a religious movement. But one of the key things about the Shakers is that part of their belief system was that they don't have kids. And the result was there are no more Shakers because it was challenging. They had to recruit people. They couldn't continue the concept of being a Shaker by producing more people. And as a result, there are no more. I kind of think about that when I look out in society and I think like, okay, this group of people is talking about we don't want to have kids anymore, right? I just think about, this is the modern version of the Shakers, right? Whatever your group of people believes in will go by the wayside in one generation because you're going to have challenges recruiting more people as history has demonstrated. So, that's sort of an example of things from that class where I just thought it was interesting and focused on it, and it sticks with me for the rest of my life and gives me perspective on things. And anyway, that shaped my last year of college and my last year and when I got involved in entrepreneurship and things like that too. So I could have never been an entrepreneur without having the perspective on how to learn and things like that.
It's all learning. I think
Yeah.
that's what's fun. I think that is the thing. I think there's two parts. So I'm going to be careful here because I don't want to sound contentious at all. There are people out there that consider themselves entrepreneurs or that they take on entrepreneurial endeavors that are not creating jobs and are not helping other people. And it's a very self-centered thing. And that's not you and that's not your company. And I know that.
Sure.
So I want to be very explicit as I bring this up. But I do think it's interesting because to me, if I were to spend the rest of my life, quote unquote, doing my own thing in some way, the value that I would get out of that would be in being able to provide opportunities for other people, and especially around like learning and getting to do air quotes, cool stuff, and being able to bring people along with me on that journey. Now, I don't really have a point to this. It was just when you brought that up, it was just like reminded me of that thing where I see people talking about entrepreneurial things. It's a smaller scale. It's like more like, well, yes, but also it's kind of just like you're doing a side project thing.
Yeah. So there are multiple, I'd say there are multiple interesting dimensions to what you said. So one is, I'm just going to write these down and make sure that I don't forget them. So if we talk about the, side projects, things frequently begin as side projects because you're experimenting, you're trying to understand a space. And, the surface level value that you perceive the market wants or somebody wants is almost never what the actual value is when you dig deeply into it. And it almost always begins as, I'm going to go ahead and say it always begins as a side project. Somebody hears something and then they ask more questions. I think that the dimension that most people who are considering becoming entrepreneurs don't anticipate is the level of risk, the level of fear management, and then the level of effort that's required. So like all of those three things coming together, it's extremely terrifying to, go into something while removing a safety net, let's say like a full-time job that you have. Or it's an incredible amount of effort to maintain a full-time job, a safe job, and then actually get something rolling.
That's incredibly difficult.
I have seen a lot of folks kind of get tripped up there. Sometimes folks get tripped up and they learn from it and then they come back later on, right? Once they've learned from it, and that's all good. But that's a very difficult and personal journey for everybody who's trying to figure out, do I want to create something, myself or with somebody else from nothing rather than working for an entity that's already been created. And you mentioned entrepreneurship with questionable value creation. That is an interesting one and kind of a loaded question one, because I think there are a lot of arguments to be had that there are billion-dollar companies that have questionable value creation.
Oh no. Yeah.
Right. What I mean is you're right. Like it happens out there, and some people can be okay with it, or they can convince themselves of value that's being created, but it's not real, right? You can be a billionaire snake oil salesman, but that's not going to be me, because it would bother me. Now I say that, but maybe I end up with somebody who's convinced themselves that they're creating value, but they're not.
Well, what I do want to clarify when I brought this up, and like I said, I wasn't trying to be contentious. I have a better way to say this is like my code and my lens that I apply to myself.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, like I should be very explicit. I would never be willing to call myself an entrepreneur until I have someone else in the journey with me.
Oh, gotcha.
The fact that there's a different word that's been circulating, the solopreneur, and I was like, yeah, I get that. Like, I'm more in line with that. It's like, I would have a really hard time saying I'm an entrepreneur because I'm experimenting and trying some stuff right now. And then I'm on a call with you and you've run a company. Like, it's one thing when you say you're an entrepreneur, there's a social proof to that. I don't have a social proof to like, I'm an entrepreneur. It's kind of like waking up just being like, yeah, I'll just be whatever I want to be, type of thing. Which one part of that though is the thing you have to do. You have to just fake it till you make it and commit to it and just go.
Yeah, but I would never disparage somebody or think I'm better than somebody who is earlier in their journey, right? It took me 10 years to find the right co-founder, the right team to do something with. I couldn't do it on my own. I think that I really hope nobody, I haven't seen it recently. Maybe it's just because I haven't been in the right place at the right time or at the right conversations. But I think any glorification of the solopreneur is misguided because it puts people in a position of thinking they're not good enough, right? Like, well, this person did it on their own. Like, why can't I do it on my own? Well, that's because those are flukes upon flukes upon flukes, right? And anybody who's still on their own, it doesn't mean you're not good enough. Like I said, it took me 10 years. It was 10 years of me like trying things and sitting there wondering, like, am I good enough? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Right? Like the gamut of thoughts that everybody has, right? I've had them. And so anybody who's sitting there thinking those things, who's doing it on their own, no, I'm not better than you, right? It just took time for everything to click into place for me. That's it. I would encourage folks to go find other people, and it's going to be hard and it'll take you a long time to do it, but go find other people, because I would say unless you are an exception of an exception, no one is good enough on their own. It's going to require a team. So it's not you as an individual. So anyway, I just want to clarify that there's in no way, shape, or form that I think I am better than anybody else who's out there struggling on their own right now, because that is 100% not the case, guaranteed.
You're definitely better than me. So just put this on the record, and I'm not going to edit this out. This is going in the podcast. You're better than me, and that's okay. That's a good thing. See, right now I have a goal. Be like, yeah, a few things. I've got some notes written down here, and you brought up a couple of things. So you were talking about this anthropology course. I'm going to rewind us back for a second, and you talked about studying abroad. So tell me about studying abroad. Where did you go? What'd you do? What'd you study?
So the journey began in high school when a friend of mine showed, we were at the beach, I think it was at the beach after graduation, and she showed us some Japanese music videos, specifically Utada Hikaru and Hamasaki Ayumi. And Morning Musume. And the music and the music videos were so different than anything I'd ever seen before that it really caught my attention. And so then, like a good nerd, and as a result of the times, I immediately began trying to go obtain that music however I could, which was through, whatever illegal pirating service was available, because it was incredibly difficult to get any of that music in the US at the time. Right. So I started just downloading hordes of Japanese music, and that began the interest. And then I decided in college, okay, I'm going to study abroad there. And I started taking classes to do that. I eventually studied at Jochi Daigaku, which is Sophia University in Tokyo, for a semester. I mean, man, talking about that could be an entire podcast, in and of itself, because as anyone who's studied abroad recognizes, it's an incredible journey, an incredible experience. You go through so many things on something like that. What came out of it was I still do, and it reinforced my love of the culture and of the people. And, I have some very good friends as a result of that I've kept up with, that, I talk business and entrepreneurship with them, and, I see them periodically. One of them, she runs the teleprompter for the Japanese Prime Minister.
Wow.
She was in New York for the UN meeting, and I said, all right, I'm going to go up and see you. So I saw her. So it's created a ton of opportunities for great experiences throughout the rest of my life, just maintaining relationships with those folks. And then the professor who's in her class, I learned to learn. I still keep up with her, and hopefully I'll visit her hopefully at the end of April coming up. So it was wild. I'll put it this way. I did and tried everything I possibly could. Like that is where I first learned about mountaineering, because a French Canadian friend of mine who I met there, he just went to me and said, hey, I'm going to climb Mount Fuji. Do you want to come? And what he was talking about is not the traditional form of climbing Mount Fuji. At that time, there was like 10 to 12 feet of like snow and ice on the mountain. So it's not like you're just walking up the mountain. The mountain is technically closed. Skiers and mountaineers are not officially allowed to go up. It's just nobody stops them, right? So you just go and you're on your own. yeah, so that trip to Japan began my love of mountaineering. That's, continued since then.
I will tell, yes, I want to hear something about mountaineering. So if that's now or that's later.
Okay. So I'll tell you about the first time, the first experience. So my French Canadian friend was way more experienced than I was. He'd been up Machu Picchu, which is not really mountaineering, but it's high elevation hiking, things like that. But he'd also done mountaineering, skiing, snowboarding. He's a pretty experienced guy. And he asked me if I wanted to go. I said, sure, I'm an adventurous person. That sounds cool. You're a nice guy. I'm only here once. Let's do this. So I started to accumulate gear because you need specific gear. For example, you need crampons so that you can actually walk up the mountain because it's snow and ice. You need an ice axe for if you fall, you can arrest your fall so that you just don't slide 1,000+ feet and slam into a rock and die. You do want specific layers of clothing for different temperatures. So you want, it's best if you have mountaineering specific boots, but I didn't have those. I just had hiking boots, which, I never did that again with just hiking boots. So anyway, so I accumulated this stuff and I didn't have most of it there, right? Like I didn't go to Japan thinking I'm going to go mountaineering, right? I went to Japan saying, I'm studying abroad. I'm going to bring stuff for studying abroad. So I had to call my well, I guess probably like Skype with my parents back at home and say, hey, I need you to mail me a bunch of stuff to climb this mountain. And, my parents were supportive. They're like, okay, yeah, sure. Right. We'd rather you climb it with the right stuff than to go try this with the wrong stuff and then end up getting severely hurt. So they very kindly mailed me a giant box of this stuff that I needed that I didn't have. I packed it all up. We got out there. You can only really get there by bus. Everything was closed. So the first interesting challenge was that the water technically out of the sinks is not potable. It's good for washing your hands, but they tell you that you shouldn't drink it. So I don't even remember where we got water from. I don't know if we may have just said, we got to risk it, right? Because we need water, right? So whatever, we're drinking this non-potable water. We're just going to assume that it's standard Japanese overcautiousness, right? It's not gray water. There's nothing wrong with it. Just hasn't been chlorinated or anything like that. It's just coming out of a well or a spring somewhere in the mountain. So that's probably what we did now that I think about it. So we did that. I guess we got water. Then it wasn't super clear to me. I was letting him do most of the guiding, but he was playing it by ear. Well, it wasn't super clear to me what the rules or regulations were, right? Like who we needed to notify. We spoke to some folks there and eventually we just kind of said, all right, we're just going to, walk from the 5th station or hike from the 5th station to the 6th station, if I get my station numbers correct. So we did that. That was a cool hike. It was nice. It was flat, right? No problem. Relatively flat. And the 6th station is kind of where all the other mountaineers hang out and camp and skiers, folks like that. So the plan was that we would hike to the 6th station and then try and sleep for maybe 6 hours until about midnight. And then we get up at midnight and then begin the ascent of the mountain. So, we hike out there. They're mountaineers who look probably an order of magnitude more prepared than us. They've got, super nice tents with like little smokestacks coming out of the top of the tent where you can see they're cooking food and all that good stuff. And my friend, he pulls out a tent that is clearly just a 3-season tent. It's not meant for snow or cold or anything like that. So he sets that up and then he pulls out a sleeping bag, right? And I was like, oh, okay, I don't have a sleeping bag, right?
Okay, now you're in a 3-season tent. Did it at least have solid covers for the vents that like zip-on covers, or were you just relying on like a rain fly?
No, it was like mesh sides to this thing. It was like it was an ultralight 3-season tent. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to like put all my clothes and wrap myself in an emergency blanket and, try and get some sleep. I think maybe I had like a fleece bag or something with me, right? But I hadn't thought about, hey, we're going to need to like, sleep outdoors in this flimsy tent for a couple hours before we try and go up the mountain. So you can start to see my lack of experience and ill-preparedness starting to shine through. So needless to say, I just laid there like freezing until midnight, even with all my clothes on, and I didn't sleep at all. Also because the wind was incredibly strong and it was just whipping things all over the place. And as I mentioned, I'm a light sleeper, right? So there was zero sleep to be had. So midnight rolls around and we get up, we get our gear on, and we start up the mountain. This is about when I made my second critical mistake. And that was wearing too many clothes. So the rule that I didn't know about, and so I didn't follow, was be bold and start cold. So when you begin, you need to feel so cold. You need to feel uncomfortably cold because you're about to generate a huge amount of energy and heat, energy in the form of heat, right? As you start to climb this mountain. So I'm climbing. I got all my warm stuff on. I feel warm. It's great. But without really realizing what's happening, I'm beginning to sweat and I'm beginning to dehydrate. So we take breaks. I find it difficult to eat or drink large amounts. And there's probably some altitude sickness that was in there. Another piece of it could have also probably been that I just wasn't accustomed to understanding how much I should be eating or drinking, which again is another indication of a lack of experience. And so, I'm feeling a little bit nauseous while I eat or drink, but whatever. It's tough. We can keep rolling. And so we continue going. I'm slow. He's like way faster than me. I'm still sweating. And eventually, the sun comes up. The goal should be to be at the top about when the sun comes up. But I'd say we were probably maybe 8,500 feet. And so Fuji is 12,000 feet. So we were a good distance away. So I was super slow. And so the sun comes up. We're still going. I'm not somebody who just kind of gives up. Like, I'll just keep rolling. And then the cramps begin because it had just gone too far with the dehydration from sweating. So at that point, my friend recognized that, yeah, there's a problem here. So I sat down for a while. He graciously dug a seat because the problem is that Fuji is, I think it's maybe around 30 degrees in slope. And it's a volcano that is pretty much sloped all over. So it's not great to find a place to sit because when you have 10 to 12 feet of snow and ice, it starts to eliminate any pits in the mountainside, right? It all just becomes a giant slip and slide. He graciously dug a little spot for me to sit in the ice and snow. I pulled out the emergency blanket and I just sat with that for a while. It's like drinking, eating, while he was waiting for me. And he was really a great guy because he didn't act frustrated. He didn't, nothing like that. He was just totally there, totally a partner the whole time. He was a fantastic, fantastic person. After I was feeling a little bit better, then we decided, okay, we're going to head down. But meanwhile, while I was sitting there, I was just thinking the whole time, yeah, this would kind of suck if the end of this is us having to call some type of emergency services and I need to get airlifted out of here. Yeah, it wouldn't be, many people would not be too happy about that, right? So luckily, nothing like that was necessary and we started to head back down. When you start to head down, immediately you begin to feel better, right? It's astonishing the difference. And you even feel like, after a couple steps, you're like, man, maybe I could turn around and keep going up, right? But you don't. But you feel a ton better. So we're going down, and my friend, he turns to me. He says, "Hey, let me show you a faster way to go down. It's called glissading." I knew nothing about any of this. I'm just following along, right? Like, hey, whatever you tell me to do, let's try it. Let's do it. Are you familiar with glissading?
No, I'm imagining what this means because, like, I'm imagining with this word.
So glissading is when you sit down on your butt, and you typically, I'll put it this way, the recommended for safety way of doing it is you take your crampons off. You sit down on your butt, you put your feet like flat on the ground in front of you, or you can stick them out in front, okay? And then you take your ice axe and you sort of stab it into the snow or ice beside you, and you use your ice axe to manage your speed. It was, looking back, I don't know if I was too tired to be terrified, but man, looking back, if we had screwed up with the way that Fuji is as a mountain and the way that the conditions were then, which was basically pretty close to bullet ice, which bullet ice is just like, imagine that you have just covered the mountain with ice and you could shoot a gun into it and it would act like bulletproof glass, right? Like you maybe make a little dent here, but it's just like a rock. And looking back, I wasn't terrified, but I should have been, because I remember seeing my friend go down and there's this like plume of ice spraying out from behind him from his ice axe, like digging in and using it to manage his speed. And then to stop, you have to flip around onto your stomach and use a self-arrest mechanism with the axe, where it's basically you're taking the head of the axe and you're just jamming it into the ice to stop yourself. And if you screw that up, you're done, right? Like once you hit a certain speed, you won't be able to self-arrest anymore. So if you miss the self-arrest, it's over. No pressure, right? And I'm doing this for the first time. And so I was not scared, and I should have been. I should have been terrified of this, but it was super cool going down. Like it was a blast to just like whipping down the mountain with ice plumes shooting out behind you, and then to stop you whip around and do a self-arrest. And then you have to, okay, so let's say you self-arrest, right? We self-arrested, we stopped. Well, you don't have crampons on. So now you have to get to like a flat part somewhere where you can sit to put your crampons back on. You have to like shimmy like with the ice axe, or you have to slide intentionally in a glissade to try and get somewhere where it's flat. Which again, I don't even remember how I did it, but it worked out. Somehow I made it to a flat spot and like got my crampons back on. So we haven't talked about the reason you don't take your crampons, the reason you don't leave your crampons on. So if you leave them on, your feet are out in front of you, you're whipping down the mountain. If one of them catches on the ice in front of you, you will go into a cartwheel somersault. Just, I don't know how fast, 50 plus miles an hour, you'll end up like whipping down the mountain, just cartwheeling. And clearly you're going to die. Okay. So we glissaded once. We were like, okay, yeah, that was cool. That was super fast getting down this section of the mountain. And then my friend said, you know what? Let's just not take our crampons off for this next section. Let's just cut the corner and let's just do it. And I was like, okay, are you sure? And he was like, yeah. And me, I'm not the expert. I was like, okay, cool, whatever. And this is another instance where, looking back, that was insane. And we were lucky that it worked out, because I'm sliding down, just holding my feet in the air, right? So that they don't catch on the ice. And if anything had happened where I got bumped and a foot dropped and like caught on the, like again, I was going to be toast. But by some miracle, we were both okay. And I remember looking at some of the other mountaineers, like who were coming up while we were going down. And while we were doing the glissades, I could tell that they were like terrified of what we were doing, because they couldn't really tell, like, oh, are they out of control? Are they in control? And that was interesting. So on that note, talking about the other Japanese mountaineers, there was a funny translation issue at the 6th station. So we were just chatting with some folks, trying to make conversation, meeting people. And at the end of the conversation, I wanted to say, take care, which would be Kyosuke kudasai. Instead, I said, tasukete kudasai, which is help me. And so I'm walking away, and I'm like, yeah, tasukete kudasai. And I just like turn around and walk away. And then I notice he like turns around like, wait, like what? Because tasukete kudasai it's kind of like a strong help me in some circumstances. It can almost be like save me in some circumstances. And so I had no idea what was going on, but walking away, I'm like, wow, he looked really confused and like, what is he doing? I don't really understand. And then like 12 hours later on the mountain is when I realized, oh, okay, I confused the heck out of that poor guy who had no idea what was going on. So we didn't interact with the other mountaineers that much. So, it was good that it was so embarrassing that of the little interaction that I had. It was to make a fool of myself. So that was fun.
I pulled up while you were talking about this here. I was looking this up between, I was looking at 6th station and getting an idea of what this was. How long were you on the mountain?
It was probably maybe 6 to 8 hours, I think. That's probably, I don't remember what time we got back, but it was after the sun had come up. So it was probably about that. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was saying, there's like, seriously, that was one of my most favorite things in the world. Like you start off, 3:30 or 4 in the morning, your headlamps on, trudging through. Well, you're starting on lower mountains. You're trudging through the trees, and then you hit the tree line, and you're starting to go up, and you get up. Even if you don't summit, like ideally you summit as the sun's coming up or a little before, but even when you don't, and there's just nothing better. If anybody listening to this has never experienced this, you need to find a approachable, and they're out there, the approachable mountains, especially on the East Coast. You can find stuff in Virginia.
Yes.
But man, it's just beautiful. And something about being out there at dawn as it all lights up. Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Seeing the sun on the horizon, the colors, the difference in perspective that you're forcing upon your eyes at that kind of height. There is definitely something emotional about it. When I accomplished mountaineering, my first 14er, it was Mount Shasta in March of this year. Once I got past what's considered the crux of the route, which is like the hard part, like I immediately began to become emotional because I knew that I was going to do it, right? And this was going to be the first one, the first 14er that I'd done. And it's an incredibly emotional experience. It's a lot like entrepreneurship, right? It's a journey. It's a challenging journey. It's full of failure. It's not easy. And the rush and the emotion of accomplishing that and getting to the, the journey's not over. The hike's not over until you're back at the car, right? Don't be complacent. Okay. But when you reach that peak, the thing that you were aiming for, it's an incredibly fulfilling experience. It adds to the human condition so much. Yeah. It's extremely emotional. Extremely emotional.
All right, so I interrupted you. I have something to say on that too, but I don't want to keep like interrupting you and dragging you off. But
no worries. So I'll finish the Fuji story. We're just about at the end. So I had been dehydrating all day, right? I was wearing these pants that they were actually rain pants, right? To like keep the wind off. And this is another example of my lack of experience. So we got down. And I had no idea really how much I had been sweating until we went to start taking our gear off. And I like opened up the rain pants to take them off. And I literally saw water vapor like come out like steam. And that's when it became clear. I was like, yes, okay. I really screwed up here if I have a sauna, literal sauna going on in my pants. So yeah, that was the big lesson from that. And then my friend, who again, incredible guy, knows exactly what he's doing. He eventually went back 2 weeks later, and I did not go with him. Actually, there are more interesting parts to this tale. So I didn't go back with him. I'll describe why after this. He went back 2 weeks later and climbed it and then snowboarded down. So the guy's a beast. He's incredible. So I didn't go back because I was a little bit worried about, recovering from this experience. Because when I got back to my room, and you know what? There's a fascinating story about my room just before I left on this trip too. So when I got back to my room, I used the bathroom, all right? And I swear my urine was never darker in my life. It was like brown, and it terrified me.
Yep, been there, yep.
And I looked at that and I was like, oh man, I really made a mistake here. Like, that is not good for my kidneys. I should probably be cautious going forward. Now, on the flip side, for 1 week after I came back, I ran the fastest I have ever been able to run in my entire life because some acclimatization had occurred while I was up there. And it was so cool because I'm not a runner, right? That's just not how my body's designed. But I got down and I'm like running like all out, and making great times. And this was just amazing to me. And so the whole week while I was running every day to try this out, I kept getting slower and slower and slower and slower as my body reacclimatized to sea level. Now, the room, before I left on this trip, I had gone to Tokyo Disney with some friends. And I got back to my room and realized that I'd lost my keys in Tokyo Disney somewhere. And it's like midnight. And the first thing I did was I knocked on my friend's door, who was in the room beside me. Kind of sat with him to try and think about, all right, what am I going to do? Like, I don't have a key. I have to get in here. I have to, because I am going on a trip. Like, I think it was the next day. And all my gear's in there. I have to get it packed. I have to get ready. Like, this is not an option. I won't be able to go back to Tokyo Disney in time to even see if they have my keys to make this work. So I eventually decided, let's see how creative we can get. And I figured out that I can break into those rooms. There were two entrances to the room. One was the normal door, and one was a very low balcony. We're talking like 2 feet off the ground. There was a door that led to the balcony. And I borrowed a coat hanger from my friend and was able to undo the lock on that balcony and get into the room. While I was doing it, I was really, really scared that somebody was going to see this gaijin, this foreigner, trying to break into somebody's living space. And they were going to call the police, and I was going to have to try and explain that I live there, I don't have a key, I lost it, etc. Luckily, that did not happen because that may have been very challenging. They also probably would have stopped me from continuing to try and break in so that I could get my stuff, and I would have missed my trip the next day. But miraculously, I was able to figure it out. But it also resulted in me not having slept for 2 nights before I did the climb, right? Because I didn't sleep the night before the climb because I didn't have a sleeping bag. I was super cold. The wind was going crazy. And the night before, I spent the entire night trying to break into the room. Like, it wasn't a quick process. It was work.
Man, that's rough.
It was crazy. And it was really amazing. I went back to Tokyo Disney, I think 3 days later, and they had my keys. They were awesome.
That is awesome.
So full credit to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was if you can imagine, all of that took place within a span of, I'd probably say 3 days. And then, school began again on Monday. So that was wild.
Wild is an understatement. That's a busy weekend, my friend.
Yeah. Yep. Which is why I decided I wasn't going to go back with him in 2 weeks, because I needed some time.
I was hoping there was something, almost a punchline to, I decided I didn't want to learn to snowboard on Mount Fuji. Like, I really was hoping that's where you were going to go with all the first, for that being like the first time for us. I was like, and I was just like, I don't want to learn to snowboard on Mount Fuji.
No, I also had never learned, I had never snowboarded or anything like that either. So I've skied once. It's awesome, but
it'd be very interesting to learn in an environment like that.
It would be it would be, man,
extremely dangerous, but
you would get hurt, right? Like, there was the guy who went up on Mount Shasta with me. I met him on the way up, and we decided to pair up and go up. Man, he was an experienced guy, like, and he didn't snowboard down from the top of Mount Shasta because the conditions were not good. Like, even below 10,000 feet, which is where he began snowboarding, man, he fell, like, I don't know, a couple times, right? And this is not an amateur. Imagine if you fall in the wrong spot, right? Like, again, you're toast. So yeah, Fuji in those conditions is not the place to learn to snowboard. That's for sure.
So I had forgotten, because I think I asked you this when we had lunch. So your first 14er was this year, you said, in March?
That's correct. Mount Shasta.
There's still a lot of snow in March. It's still a full-on winter.
Yes, correct. It's still considered winter. And that is kind of why there are two reasons why I chose that time period. One, we were in San Francisco for a wedding. I was, my first thought is, okay, we're going to a wedding. I wonder if there's some kind of mountain somewhere on the West Coast that I could do this year, right? Because I do this maybe once a year. And then I saw Mount Shasta and I was like, oh yeah, it's 4 hours away. That's a doable drive. I can do that. It just happened to be that it was winter. I also kind of liked it being in winter because I like there to be a little bit more snow. And in the past 2 years, Shasta hadn't been getting quite as much precipitation as it had been previously. And so, I wanted to go and I wouldn't be walking on a bunch of gravel and rocks at low elevation, because I think it's more fun to go across snow and things like that. But the problem is that in winter, there are way fewer days of good weather. We had planned to be at Mount Shasta for a week to try and aim for a good weather window. So there was what looked like on the weather forecast, a not great, but not nuclear bomb sort of weather event that was going to take place. The window was going to be, I think it was maybe like 1 or 2 days after we had gotten there. Got up at 3 a.m., drove to the trailhead, got there maybe like 3:34 and started. Man, the wind was way more intense than I would have anticipated. There was one other person going up, and I was chatted with him briefly. I asked him, I said, "Oh, are you going to the top?" He looked pretty experienced. He was actually going on skis, so he was going to ski down. And he just looked at me and said, "Fuck no, I'm not going up." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, it's probably a good decision."
You just go, "Yeah, me neither, me neither." That's difficult against. Good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then, so later on, as I was continuing, I was just going to go and see how high I could get. Like, the wind was pretty intense. It was coming in gusts. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go until I can't go anymore. Then at about 9,000 feet, it got so strong that I had to lay on the ground so that I wouldn't get blown over. And at that point, I said, yeah, okay, this is as high as I can go. Because if I get blown over, this is not going to be good, because I'll just start flying down the mountain.
That's terrifying. And that's no joke. People that haven't done this or don't know about wind elevation, it is absolutely no joke. A young woman died. Was it this year? I'm trying to remember. I was just reading about it. I want to feel like it was up in like New Hampshire or Vermont, but I may be mistaken. But she was trying to summit quite a few mountains before her birthday and was literally blown off the mountain from the wind.
Yep. Yeah, that has happened on Mount Fuji. Some people have set up a tent on near the summit or on the side, and they have the tent's just been blown off. Right. So it's like you said, imagine, maybe a good example is imagine being in a hurricane walking on a balance beam. And it's that risky, except the balance beam to the left and to the right is 1,000 feet. So you're right. It is no joke. So I decided, okay, that was enough for me, right? If I have to lay on the ground in order to not get blown off the balance beam, then I'm turning around, which was a great decision, because later on in the day, I remember looking up at the mountain, and the snow and ice from the top of the mountain was being blown probably 100 feet plus off of the mountain. So you can see it being blown into the air as a cloud, which means that there's no human being that could possibly be up there. So it's good that I didn't try. And then later on in the week, there was one day that was really a great weather window, and it was near the end. I think it was like maybe 1 or 2 days before we had to leave, and I was super lucky that it was there. And that's when I went up, met another guy while we were up there, or while we were climbing up. We partnered up and we were able to summit, and it was great having somebody else. Going by myself, it would have been an even bigger challenge. And the guy I was with, who is experienced, he's done way more than I have. Even he said to me, he's like, yeah, I was just burned out that day, and having somebody else there with me to encourage me not to turn around, that was the difference between him making it and not making it. So it was really beneficial to both of us that we just met climbing on the way up. And his experience in route finding, things like that, was crucial. I don't think avalanche was really a risk, but having somebody else to sit there and chat about, hey, that looks kind of risky. Like, let's take this route or not, or this route or this route. And it was great. It was also great having somebody else there to take your picture. Yeah. Because it's pretty tough to take your own picture and make it a good one when you're doing it by yourself. So that was pretty awesome as well.
So you hit one of the notes that I had written down here. Did you take any avalanche training? Did you read anything online? Watch some videos? Did you do anything around that first?
So I have not taken any official avalanche training. There's a book called Freedom of the Hills, and that goes through some of it. I have read about it, and the biggest thing to me is I am not going to assess avalanche conditions myself. I am going to learn about the conditions from parks services and other organizations that publish current conditions. And unless those conditions are green across the board, I'm not going. Because I do not have the experience, nor would I be able to practice it enough to go out there and make an assessment myself and feel good about it. Because it's like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I don't use it every day, like somebody who lives in Utah and might go skiing every weekend. So my general philosophy is I will let some professional tell me what conditions look like. And unless they are perfect, it's a no-go.
That's good.
So that's a good question.
Do you have a spot tracker with you?
When you say spot tracker,
the GPS emergency SOS beacon, do you use those?
Yeah, I do. So I've brought them with me in the past, but because I only go when it's green, they just ended up being dead weight, right? I've taken avalanche beacons in the past with me. And again, it was so useless that I actually lost it on the mountain because I hung it up somewhere and then just totally forgot about it and just left it there. Because, look, if everything's green, it's not worth it. In the future, on larger mountains, I think there's an argument to be had for certain types of beacons, like if you're doing Denali and you're out there for a long period of time where conditions can change and it might be green when you begin, yellow or red at some point during the week. I think there's a strong argument to be made where you just have it with you. But for places like Shasta or even Mount Rainier, if you're doing it super fast, it just doesn't make sense, right? And being over-prepared can be just as bad as being under-prepared. Because if you add weight, you slow yourself down, and the slower you move, the more dangerous it is. So that was another hard lesson that I learned on Mount Rainier, right? Well, we way over-prepared for it when we tried it. and it overburdened my partner, such that a 6-hour climb from Paradise to Camp Muir took 12 hours. Oof. We were engineers. We were like, all right, we read the books. We got all the checklists. We're going to have it all. We're going to be ready to go. But in reality, there's a very important balance between things that you actually need and the stuff that you don't, so that you can move quickly and safely from one place to another. So now that was another great lesson in that over-preparing is a problem. And there are some schools of thought even around, like one of the guys who, I forget his name, but he was one of the co-authors of Training for the New Alpinism. He actually discusses the concept of, is it safer to take less gear and do a climb faster than it is to take more gear and do a climb more slowly and cautiously? With the theory being, and this is true, the more time in your life that you spend on a mountain, the higher your chance of dying on the mountain.
Sure.
And that does play out when you look at, when you look at great mountaineers who are spending a ton of time in the mountains. Eventually, no matter what you do, something gets you. And it's just, you're playing the probability game. And if you play the game 100 times versus once, like, you only have to be wrong once and you're done. So.
And you mentioned you only do this once a year. What do you do to stay in shape when you're not out climbing? Is it just cardio? Is just focused on endurance?
Great question. So, Training for the New Alpinism is a fantastic book that, if you're interested in this kind of athletic activity, that I highly recommend at least considering, because it goes through the physiology of how the authors have translated their knowledge in things like Olympic cross-country skiing to their work and their lives as mountaineers as well. So it goes through the physiology, it goes through the training, it goes through all of the logic. And in the end, mountaineering is an endurance sport. So that is the angle at which you should approach it from a fundamental level. Now, it is not exactly like running a marathon or like cross-country skiing, because you have instances that require more strength than a marathon or cross-country skiing, because you have heavy loads that you have to take. Sometimes you have to do things with those loads, right? Move them in weird ways, moving your body in weird ways. Depending on if you're going to really be an alpinist, sometimes you're using your hands, right? It's a combination of rock climbing and mountaineering. So at the fundamental base, it's an endurance sport. And then strength training gets built on top of that. So what I do, and I'm a big believer in build your own plan, right? Try things, learn about how things work, and then adapt it for yourself. Because every time I've tried to take somebody else's plan for me, I always end up with some kind of injury, right? So what I do is I really like CrossFit. So I've adapted the CrossFit concept to what I consider to be a good place for me for mountaineering. So CrossFit works by having 3 days of exercise, 1 day break, then 3 days of exercise, 1 day break. So what I will do is during the 3 days of exercise, I will spend some period of time. Right now, it's about 45 minutes using a plyo box. So just like a step-up box that is, I think the side that I typically use is 16 inches. You can use whatever height you want, right? Different people who are different heights will try different things. I'm a short person. So I will do 45 minutes of step-ups with a backpack. The total weight is 30 pounds. And I will do it so that my heart rate is within a specific band, with the idea being that in that band, I am improving cardiovascular capability most effectively. And then after I do that, I will do some form of other exercise, typically like, a daily workout for CrossFit, to build strength and I'll call it short-term endurance, right? But you're using a different biological path. You're using the anaerobic energy generation path versus the aerobic. And is that perfectly optimized? I don't know. A big part of exercise is what you can mentally get up and do every day. And I can mentally get up and do that every day. The variety is sufficient for me. I enjoy it sufficiently. Is that what I will be doing a year from now? I don't know. I've been doing it pretty much this whole year, and I've really enjoyed that. That ticks the boxes for me at the moment.
So one last question. I mentioned you brought something up, and it was a ways back. I mean, you're kind of this concept. I mean, the note that I wrote down was challenging your body. And you're talking, climbing in the snow, climbing in winter. Do you follow, and I can't remember if we talked about this at lunch or not, do you follow Wim Hof at all?
I do not.
He's all about breathing exercises and cold exposure. And he does ice baths. He's a big proponent of ice baths.
Interesting.
Controlling your breathing. And the thing that he will talk about, and he's got a book, and I think he's has tons of YouTube videos if you want to check any of that out. But he talks about how that getting into cold water activates, I want to make sure I say it right. It's our cardiovascular system, but it's our capillaries and things that generally don't get a workout because we're always in a climate controlled environment. We're not what we used to be. And so it's about this kind of like shock the system and everything. It's making them all dilate,
interesting,
and constrict and do all these things. So he talks about that. And then he talks a lot about breathing, and the breathing stuff. You can kind of correlate what he's saying with other resources, but some of the breathing exercises are a little bit like hyperventilation. And so some of the mental effects that you experience, in some cases, not delirium. What is that? Euphoria. A sense of euphoria for the breathing is because you're doing this type of hyperventilation. But anyways, he's a very interesting character, and I follow his stuff at arm's length. I don't practice it, but I've taken some cold showers. I haven't done an ice bath yet, but maybe this year, maybe 2023, I'll do the ice bath.
So I can guarantee you that people will feel effects from them. Like it's well understood that ice baths and things like that, even like breathing, all of that, it has real physiological effects on the body. You can debate what those are, and that's fine, but there are effects. There is a reason why during CrossFit competitions, after the daily workout, which is what they call the specific phase of a competition, a specific competition, after the workout, everybody runs and gets in a barrel full of ice water because they're shunting blood out of their muscles, which the idea is it will also pull lactic acid from the muscles simultaneously so that they don't end up with sore muscles for the competition later that day or the next day. There are real effects that take place. I don't know what they are. I think we're still learning a lot of what those are, but things do happen. So that's very interesting.
I don't know. Just with the hiking in winter and stuff, I don't know. I thought you might follow Wim Hof, some of the cold stuff that he talks about.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, anything you want to close on?
Thanks for having me. I hope the discussion was interesting and it wasn't too boring for folks. And if it wasn't, I'd be happy to be back.
We need to do a part 2 for sure. I was going to say that. Like, I don't know how this went for you. It was good for me, and I really want a part 2. Because we didn't talk enough about the entrepreneurial side.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Lee.
All right, everybody. John Petitte. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of Fish Tales. For show notes from this episode and more information about the show, visit leetrout.com. Music production by Haroon Sarang. We'll see you next time.